Now, for the third video in the Incomplete Records series, this is Incomplete Records 3, where the focus would be not only on opening equity, but also on expenses that appear on the income statement. The expenses require a fair bit of work because of accruals and prepayments, in keeping with the accruals slash matching concept. And so initially I'll start off with the expenses, looking at the cash book, the way they appear in the cash book, and what sort of adjustments they need before inserting them onto the income statement, and looking for some possibility of expenses that don't appear in the cash book, searching through the additional information to see if there's any expenses we could have left out and including them, and finally I'll conclude with how the opening equity is ascertained. I will firstly focus on the income or expenses. In this case, I don't see any income, so it'll just be expenses that need some adjusting before they appear on the income statement. So the expenses are up here in the cash book on the payment side, on the money going outside, and the expenses are rent 1650, rates 890, general expenses 375. Now, with rent, for instance, we have rent owing down here, rent owing last year, so the 1650 is going to be affected, and with the rates, there's rates prepaid last year and this year, so that rates figure up there of 890, it's going to have to change a fair bit. And general expenses, I don't see anything sticking out here. And then there's also in this middle paragraph of the additional information, there's another expense there of wages that's been paid in cash, so that's going to have to appear on the income statement, and that'll be it then. I think that's about it. So I've accounted for everything here. So let's now adjust these expenses and get them ready for the income statement. So the rent paid this year was 1650, and that appears here in the cash book. Now, do we show the 1650 as an expense on the income statement? We normally do, but in this case we don't, because the rent figure is going to be impacted by the rent owing last year of 150. So the rent figure that will be shown on the income statement then will be the 1650 minus the 150, which will be 1500. And the reason for that is rent owing last year belongs to last year, but it would have been paid this year. So we remove it because it does not belong to this year, but it belongs to last year. There are other better reasons for that, but I've given you the simplest one. So just work on the premise that if rent was owing last year, it will be paid this year, would have been paid this year, so we subtract it because it belongs to last year. And with rates prepaid, on the other hand, the rates prepaid of well, firstly rates was 890, rates paid this year was 890, but we have rates prepaid last year of 210 and prepaid this year of 225, and the approach is slightly different because the a prepayment is the opposite of an accrual or owing. So the rates of 890, what we'll do then is we will add the 210. We'll add this 210 because it was paid last year for this year, so it belongs to this year. And we will subtract the 225 because the 225 was prepaid this year, but it belongs to next year, and we subtract it because it's included in the 890. So it's got to come out, as it does not relate to this financial year. So the final rates figure then is 875. So the 875 for rates will be shown on the income statement. And I've also indicated that general expenses will have to be shown on the income statement as an expense. There's no adjustments to that. And also, whilst we're there, very important to look at depreciation. And in this case, if we look at fixtures, there's fixtures of 2,500 last year and 2,250 this year. So the difference in value of fixtures would be a depreciation of 250. Now that's another expense that will be shown on the income statement. So I'm not going to redo or write up the income statement for you, but I'm pointing out items that you can add, include in your income statement to earn the vital marks that you need. So don't miss out on things like depreciation, because it's not mentioned anyway, but you should be, you are now forewarned to look out for these things. So you just need to be alert and look at the value of assets, fixed assets especially, from one year to the other. Consider your prepayments and your accruals to pick up the additional marks. There'll be vital marks, lots of marks actually. You'll be rewarded for these things. And also, finally, don't forget the wages of 5472. Now, to find the opening equity. This is in order to complete the balance sheet. The rest of the balance sheet is going to be fairly straightforward. We will have non-current assets / fixed assets at the top. In this case, there's just one, which is fixtures, and it's shown at book value. Then it'll be followed by current assets, current liabilities, and a net assets. And now for the equity part of the balance sheet, we need opening capital, and we'll be able to figure out the closing capital by adding net profit and subtracting drawings. The net profit will come from your income statement, and the drawings is will be here somewhere. In this case, there's some drawings mentioned, indicated in here. Here's the drawings figure here of 6541, and there's some additional drawings there. So we've got our drawings, we've got our net profit from the income statement, and now we just need to find our opening capital. So we'll have to look at last year's figures there. This is it. Opening capital will come from there. Last year's assets minus liabilities, and you will recognize assets and liabilities in this list. So what you'll then do is list your assets, subtract your liabilities, and you'll find your opening capital. So I've made a list of assets, inventory 13862, trade receivables 9031, rates, which is prepaid last year, so it's an asset, 210, and fixtures 2500. So is this our list of assets, or are we missing any? I think most of you will say yes, that's correct, that's our list of assets. But a common mistake is to forget a very important and a very common asset, an asset that always features, but it's not on this list, and there's good reason why it's not on this list, and that's because it appears up here, there. So that is the bank balance, and that in exams or in tests is often left out by students. So don't get caught into that trap and leave it out, because it's going to result in a loss of very easy marks. So that would be a silly error. So we'll now add bank to this list of 405. It is an asset because the bank balance up there is on the debit side, and do remember that if that balance was on the credit side, then that opening balance would be a liability, so our working would be slightly different. So the subtotal here is 26008, and then I'll make a list of my liabilities. There are just two on this list. There's trade payable of 5624, and a rent owing of 150, that gives me 5774, which then gives me an opening equity of 20234. 20234 was the opening equity, so I'll put it down here just to make a record of it. 20234, and that is your opening equity, which is most likely going to earn you 3 or more marks in a test or an exam. And that brings us to the end of this series of incomplete records tasks, and I hope this helps you in this topic. Be aware though that the resources are not always going to look exactly like this, so you're going to have to be alert, read carefully, look for little hooks, little traps, and there shouldn't be too many. I think a common sense approach will help you out largely. And finally, when you do the income statement, just one last thing that I don't want to miss out is this. Sorry, when you do the balance sheet, this figure of 602, which is your closing balance of the cash book. Now, you'll have to be asking yourself, is that a debit balance or a credit balance? A good student will say that that is a credit balance, and which is an overdraft. So think about where that appears on the balance sheet. Is it going to be listed with your current assets or with your current liabilities? What do you think?